Hey everyone, sometimes us gamers do not have the opportunity to hang out with friends like I'm doing right now with Eric, who recently made his vocal debut on the channel?
Yeah, I think vocal.
Yeah, okay. Vocal debut on the channel with our Iliad and I-Core review, which you can check that out. However, I needed to talk to everyone about solo games because it'd been a while since I'd had a chance to go over our top 10 list of solo games, and I know that Eric is also a big solo gamer.
Yeah, all the time. I love solo games. It's kind of how I got into board gaming in the first place. So for me, solo games always have like a really big place in my life, and they still do to this day.
Did you get into solo games when the pandemic was in full lockdown, or had you already been kind of dipping your toes into the solo water?
Definitely during the lockdown. My first solo game that I played was Gloomhaven, which was a lot to do in terms of upkeep as a first-time solo board gamer, but I still loved it. I had a really great time, and it made me want to do it more, and then I looked for, I think, a lot lighter, easier to access games.
It may have influenced your decisions from that point forward.
Yeah, I think it scared me a little bit, but I've definitely gotten back into heavier solo games, and I have so many that I've played, and I agreed with you, Jack, that now is a great time to share our top 10 solo games.
Yeah, so this is going to be our individual top 10s that may have some overlap and is representing the Cardboard Herald's top 10 or more like 18 best solo experiences that we have right now, because sometimes it's fun to talk about the things that we do alone together.
Yeah.
So, with that said, my number 10 is a new game, one that I have had such an energized time with, and that is Leviathan Wilds. Now, the reason why this made it onto the list is because it overcomes one of the limitations, I think, of solo gaming, which is where you play a big, epic sort of dungeon crawly game, and it doesn't feel like a full robust experience because you don't have multiple people to run the multiple characters and have that synergistic time. Well, this just says, you know what, we're going to have one class, two characters, combine it all into one deck. That's one of the core mechanisms of how you build characters in the game. And it preserves the experience of having to climb these enormous titans or leviathans in this game. But nonetheless, you are managing one hand, one pool of grip, as it's described in the game, and it still feels like a fluid experience that is every bit as challenging and immersive as the full game.
My number 10 is Set a Watch. It's not a new game, but it's new to me. I have only started playing it recently, and I love it. There's so much depth in terms of all the different characters you can play as. There's so much math that you can go through and try and find the perfect line, which takes the least amount of damage, takes the least amount of resources, and gets through the line as quickly as possible with as few risks as possible. I think that I prefer playing this game solo, which is one of the reasons I put it on my solo list. I think being able to see all of the options in front of you at once, instead of having to kind of juggle back and forth between two different or three different players, is just the ideal way to play this game for me.
I nearly put this game on my list, and in some ways I'm still struggling with the idea of not including it on my list, but when you had it on your list, I was like, okay, it's going to be represented. I can let it go because I do want to highlight some new games, and in case you don't know, all this like board game or anything top 10 on the internet, there's a bit of horse trading going on behind the scenes. So I'm glad Set a Watch is getting its due. It is such a great game. Do you have a favorite character yet?
I really like the Cavalier.
Oh, so good.
Yeah.
I love the barbarian orc.
Oh,
so good. Yeah. So my number 9 is another new game that I had a chance to play, and maybe it's a little bit of the cult of the new or the hype train or whatever, but I just had such a great time with the solo implementation that I wanted to put Stonespine Architects, not Stone Spire Architects as I constantly want to call this game, but Stonespine Architects on this list, which is the follow-up game by the design and publisher combo that make Cartographers, which in itself is a great solo game, but it's just such a nice Euro tile laying dungeon building implementation that allows you to have essentially the same core experience of playing the multiplayer game, but giving you enough opposition through an automated player that simulates the experience of having to play against someone, but you're not having to perform everything for them, which I've talked about endlessly is one of the things about solo games that I really look for. I don't want to have to fully manage an AI that is essentially me just playing two-handed against myself.
Yeah, I really love solo games that have kind of very little to no upkeep. Which is one of the reasons why my number 9 is Micro Macro Crime City.
That's a doozy of a name.
It is awesome. It's Where's Waldo but with murder, and
you don't know what's happening. I mean, I've seen some of those Where's Waldo spreads. They definitely have some dubious things happening in them.
They do, but this one you are playing as an investigator. You get a giant map of a city, and you draw a deck of cards and just says, hey, this person was murdered, figure out what happened. And you look through this map that is both the past and also the future, and you follow along and try and solve the crimes present. And it is so easy to set up. All you do is you take a map out, lay it down, grab a random case, and then go at it. I love it for its simplicity. I love it for how quick it is to actually just get onto the table and get through a case pretty quickly. I think the longest I've taken on a case is like 30 minutes, so it's very easy for me to just, if I have a little bit of time between things, it's very easy to break out, which I really appreciate, and I think that it is a super solid game. The one limiting factor is you can only play it as many cases as there are. They're not going to be able to put in new cases. You get like 10 cases in the boxes, but at this point I think they have 3 different versions, so all 3 are great.
You got a lot of content to work with.
Yeah I think for the price, it's a great game.
Well, my number 8 is a classic by terms of how fast the board game industry moves, and that is Wingspan. It is still my favorite of the now famed Automa Factory's implementations of the multiplayer design into a solo game. A lot of people's first experience with solo gaming is via Automa Factory, in seeing something being done with, say, Scythe or Viticulture or Tapestry. But for me, Wingspan is still that beautiful engine building experience that is fairly minimalistic. It's easy to dive into. You're playing with all those great components. But like I said with Stonespine Architects, you're not having to deal with the overhead of true opposition, but there are smart things that are happening by the automated player that are giving you, I guess, prompts to play against and play around, and in some ways, opportunities that you wouldn't necessarily have in the multiplayer game, but make for good puzzle decision making.
From birds to bears, my number 8 is Cascadia.
Cascadia. All right, let's talk about Cascadia.
Let's talk about Cascadia. I enjoy it in terms of it being a super relaxing game, which sometimes is exactly what I need from a solo game. I want to be able to sit down and just have a kind of peaceful time.
What's the difference between relaxing and boring?
That's, I think that there are things to be said about both. I personally enjoy Cascadia. I can tell you do not. I think that the solo mode is really neat. You're basically just playing a 2-player game, but you have different goals or requirements you have to reach to consider a win. Consider having reached a win. And that can be different kinds of animals, reaching a certain point threshold. And I know that I don't actually usually love solo games where the goal is just to score a higher score than the last time, but I think it gives you just enough that you do have to really think about what you're doing. And I do enjoy the fact that you can kind of zone out for a little bit and come back to Cascadia, and not much has changed. You can pretty much jump right in. And I know for some people that the fact that there isn't more mental load might mean that this game is boring, but I personally do enjoy it.
Well, my number 7 is actually a game that's going to appear higher up on Eric's list, so we're going to bypass the deliberation until we get there, so that way we can hash it out. But what's your number 7, Eric?
My number 7 is Sherlock Holmes, Consulting Detective. In a similar way to Micro Macro Crime City, I really enjoy solving crimes on my own. I think that that's a niche that I realized when I was making this list I very much enjoy. It's much smarter and it's much more in-depth than Micro Macro Crime City. You get like a whole bunch of random red herrings thrown in there. I really am, I think even in video games and in board games, I'm an explorer. I like to go through every single detail that is presented to me and try and get as much out of it as possible. And Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective is really great for that. You just are rifling through these 2 different booklets trying to solve what happened here. And for me, that's right up my alley in terms of what I want from a board game on just a cozy night.
Yeah, I have always kind of viewed the sort of puzzle tale type games, which I like quite a bit and have covered a considerable amount on the channel, as more like social experiences. Like those are things I really like doing with my wife, or like as a couple's night, that kind of thing. Nonetheless, they are fully completable as a solo game, and that's really cool that that's something that you've kind of gravitated to. It's almost like reading a novel or something.
I think I prefer playing it solo just because of how many small details there are. Passing the booklet back and forth between multiple players would be the only way to play it co-op, and it just, I feel like, detracts from the experience of me just really hammering in with like a nice drink, just this is my evening, I'm gonna solve this case by the end of the night.
Spoken like someone who believes he's the smartest person in the room and doesn't want to have to deal with the inferior intellect. My number 6 is yet another new game, and I think part of this was I just wanted to highlight so many new great games coming out with brilliant solo implementation that would be worthwhile considering whether you're going to be playing multiplayer or you're picking up games just for solo, and that is The White Castle, which, if you've been following this channel, you know that I said The White Castle was my favorite game of last year, and I stand by that. I think it's an incredible game. I think it is just a beautiful balance of minimalistic design with only 9 turns that you're taking across 3 rounds in a worker placement game, but everything that you do has so much import and consequence. And one of the problems or challenges of the game is that because everything has so much weight to it, it's very easy to fall into an analysis paralysis trap, which you don't have to worry about other people being frustrated about you taking so long, or you having to wait for someone else to take so long when you're playing a solo game. And again, this is a simple card-driven system that simulates some of the experience of playing against a good player. Like, the board state is going to evolve in ways that represent the same sort of evolutions that would happen in a multiplayer game, but nonetheless, it's very minimalistic overhead, and you are still having that full, robust puzzle And it's just absolute fire. In fact, I handed this off to Eric just the other day. I was like, you need to take this home. You need to bask in its glory.
My number 6 is a very minimalistic card game. We're going to go from an actual board game to a card game that you can play with just one deck and a joker. It's from the Isoludo collection, which I found on Reddit during the summer of 2021, where we were still kind of handling lockdowns in Los Angeles, which is where I was living. So I still had a ton of time indoors. The game I have from the Isoludo collection is Loot the Loop. It's a
insane,
crazy, just wild card game. The theme of the game is you're playing as a temple raider going through a deck of cards and trying to get the gems out, which are the aces. And you're trying to avoid the traps, which are the face cards. And there's a ton here with very simple rules. I think that the depth of it is kind of one of the things that I enjoy, just in terms of navigating through a deck of cards that slowly is becoming more and more trap filled, and just trying to get out with all the gems is really fun. It's a really cool core gameplay loop, and I think that the minimalism of it, where I just need a deck of cards and I can play a game that is very simple. All you need to do is just remove one of the jokers, shuffle the deck, and you are ready to go. I really enjoy the fact that I can kind of bring it wherever I am. Like if I'm just waiting for friends at a bar and have a deck of cards for various reasons, as one does,
just carry it in your pocket.
In my pocket, my deck of cards. I can play a really satisfying game that doesn't take that long. It can definitely be played multiple times in a row.
My number 5 is, surprise, surprise, yet another new game, but it's kind of a stand-in for a concept. This is Earthborne Rangers. It is that kind of investigative, semi-combat-y, but, not really expansive, story-driven game where you can level up characters, you can discover key moments and items. But what Earthborne Rangers brings to the fold is, one, the characters are less reliant on the synergies between them. That is a cool aspect, but I feel completely good about one-handing it, whereas, say, Arkham Horror LCG, which has a lot of design inspiration to Earthborne Rangers, you really get the most out of the game in seeing different investigators make up for their weaknesses. The other thing is that it has this very innovative open world system that you can effectively stop a session at any time that may bear consequences, but you can camp out and save. So it feels, if anything, more like an old school JRPG that I was playing as a kid. And there's a sprawling world. There's emergent story moments that happen in a very smart system. The way the decks just shuffle together to create the different terrain types and the different possibilities, and the keywords that intersect impacting the world is just, it's brilliant. It's a sweeping game. It's very polished. It's interesting, and it's very strategic, in spite of the ambitions making it sound like how challenging and really mechanical could that be.
From my 6 to 5, I'm going from a very simple, minimalistic card game to a very convoluted, upkeep-heavy card game, which is Imperium, Legends, and Classics. I have a lot of mixed feelings about this game when it comes to the co-op version, which is I don't ever want to teach this game.
It does have a little bit of insanity to it. Like there's a lot going on.
It's maybe far too much going on for co-op. One of my worst fears is teaching somebody this game. It's one of my greatest fears. But as a solo game, I really enjoy it. I think there's a lot of depth there. I mean, you have so many different factions to play with and really try to hone in on. I really love the Qin Dynasty, so that's a deck that I play a lot. And it's not just the decks that you play, you also choose different factions to go against, and there's tables to tell you how they operate that make them mimic how a normal player would play them, but in a way that still feels like you're not just substituting in a normal player. Like, there is a strategy that you can go into it with of, I know that this faction is always going to get rid of this land that I want, so I have to do something about it now. And I kind of like the fact that there is a bit of predictability in what the other faction is going to do.
And the different factions, what I found most fascinating about a game that ultimately I just found wasn't for me, but like it's not just your strategy for getting to the same point. I mean, I guess it is in the sense that you're getting to the point of winning, but like fundamentally, the asymmetry feels like the entire vibe of different factions, like what they construct, how they interact, how they get points, feels like you are having very different concepts at work there.
Yeah, I really enjoy the fact that the asymmetry feels like this is how the game has to be. And I actually met you because you were getting rid of this game, because you definitely did not like it as much as I do.
That's true. That's true.
And yeah, I think that...
I noticed Robinson Crusoe isn't on your list, though.
Yeah, Robinson Crusoe did not make my list.
My number 4 is a game that's not typically a solo game, or at least out of the box, it's not a solo game. And so I feel kind of dirty putting it on the list, but it's that good. And that is Undaunted, which there was the original Undaunted release in Normandy, and then shortly after you had North Africa and Reinforcements, which Reinforcements not only gave you more toys to play with in either of those two releases, but came out with an official adaptation of the brilliant solo design that happened by professional designers, but on the BGG forums as just like fan implementations of solo-driven work that is scripted to each individual campaign of Undaunted Normandy, North Africa, and Reinforcements. Like every scenario has a unique pool of the cards that you're going to have for the solo functioning automa, and you have the complete complement covered in this, whether you want to play as the Allies or you want to play as the Nazis. I mean, that feels weird. Feels weird want to play as the Nazis. But nonetheless, whether you want to play as the good guys or the bad guys, you have the ability to automate the opposing faction. It is a little bit bananas in how expansive it is. It is one of those things where you're dedicating a full gaming night to this if you're playing it solo. It's one of those types of games that I wouldn't expect to function really well as a solo game, and yet it does.
So we're getting to the part of my list that starts including more print and play games. I kind of got into solo gaming through print and play games, because after Gloomhaven I started looking for the least amount of components that I could very easily acquire and just get gaming. So
post-traumatic Gloomhaven syndrome. Yeah.
TGD. I have Under Falling Skies as my number 4. It is sci-fi themed, which is my favorite theme in board games. I love science fiction. I always have. So when I saw this game, I was really stoked to play it, and it is smart. It is really... The decisions matter so much in what you do, and it just feels very right. Like, all of the rules make sense. It's a very clear, oh, well, because I did this, clearly this thing is going to happen, and that's exactly how the rules work, and it's a game that just makes sense. And it's solo only, which I think maybe bumped it up my list a little bit, in that this is how this game was meant to be played. I think that there's so much depth here, because there's a whole campaign you can play.
I nearly put Nemo's War on this list as a representative of the solo first design philosophy, and I've played a few games at this point where even if they have multiplayer versions as part of a retail list to make it more appealing to the masses, or at least to the publishers, where it was very clear that the design itself was to be a solo game. And there is something to be said about something that kind of adopts the mindset that one person is going to be examining all this.
Yeah, and I just think that Under Falling Skies it definitely has a bit of nostalgia for me. Like when I don't have somebody to play and I really need to scratch a board game itch, Under Falling Skies is really simple. Just get out, done. I have it laminated. I still am playing the print and play version.
Yeah.
And it's great.
Yeah, and then you're in a better mood for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
My number 3 is, I had to have some Cole Worley representation on here, so I went with Pax Pamir 2nd edition, which I think is the best solo implementation of any of Cole's games. It is so fluid and smart and interesting. It doesn't necessarily feel like you're playing against a big, robust set of players because the politic is so much of most of Cole's games. But nonetheless, the new puzzle that is presented through the Wakan, I hope I'm pronouncing that, deck is so brilliant and conniving and presents some really fascinating gambits that you can do, that you actually have personal stakes. You are like dedicated to taking down this deck of cards and seeing how you can really exploit the systems that are so rich in that game in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm very glad Cole World got it represented here, because I think he is one of both of our more played designers. I think we both played a lot of his games, and Arcs is awesome. I can't wait to see what solo mode either the community comes up with or he comes up with.
Exactly.
I would love to play Arc solo. My sci-fi love is definitely interest is peaked.
Could not be more peaked.
My top 3 was actually your number 7, and it stays in the sci-fi realm for me, which is Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition.
So good.
It is such an awesome game, both multiplayer and solo, and I feel like the solo really does pretty well to represent playing other players without having them there, and it is fluid, your turns are really quick, and I think that what I like most about the solo version of Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition is just how fluid the game feels. Like from one turn to the next, your brain doesn't have to lose its train of thought.
Right.
The entire time I can be focused and on without having to really do too much upkeep.
Ares Expedition just has a constant dopamine hit of turn after turn after turn, whether you're playing the multiplayer game or not. What I really like about the solo game is that it gives you a reliable set of other players' activations. You know that they're going to run through 5 cards and it's in a random order, and you can bounce off of that strategically in interesting ways, kind of accounting for, well, I know they've already gone through their, their red and blue action, their green action, so I know I'm going to get a production here in the next 3. And you can minimize the instances in which you are having kind of a dud turn because you both picked the same thing.
Yeah, and I think that there's a depth that you don't get in the multiplayer game, which elevates it to such a high spot for me.
My number 2, I think that I'm still having some remorse on putting this so high, but I couldn't think of something else that I wanted higher than this. And I can't believe it because it's one of those games where it's like, yo, just get as many points as you can. But I've re-fallen in love with Agricola in the last 3-4 years, having played it way back in the day when it was such a monumental and impactful release, and everyone adored Agricola, and then everyone kind of moved on from it. The solo game of Agricola, especially in the revised edition where there's a campaign, which sounds ridiculous to have a campaign for your little, like, farming game, but nonetheless... having the ability to carry over one of the jobs that you have, the professions, into the next session, but then the point threshold in which to win gets all that much higher, it means that you're having to exploit things in that much more micromanagey of a way each time. It plays really fast, it looks great at the table, and it's allowed me to re-fall in love with a game that was already really impactful. And while we've had a lot of so-called evolution in worker placement from then, going through this has allowed me to kind of reassess that, yeah, it's still just one of the best.
And it's a great game. I think you should not be ashamed at having it that
so
high.
Much shame. So much shame.
But it is such an awesome game, and no shame with having it that high. My number 2 is also worker placement, but it's a little bit of a different style. My number 2 is Maquis, which I think is how it's pronounced. It's French. And I'm only on 2 years of French Duolingo, so I don't know how anything's pronounced. It is a worker placement where you are trying to take down the Nazis by subversion. This game has a ton of different campaigns to do. The community is constantly putting forward new scenarios that you can play, and it is just awesome. It works so well. You're trying to put your people in places that get you all of the things that you need, because you need these bombs in the next 3 turns, or else you have lost. But you got to balance that with one bad roll of where the Nazis end up, and you have lost that person forever. They are gone, and you are down a worker for the rest of the game. And it is such a good solo game. It's one of those games where it is designed to be solo. It's a print and play, which again is how I learned to love it in the first place. It was really simple for me to just find it one day and then play it immediately. I think the dopamine hit of seeing something and then immediately wanting it and then being able to have it immediately is something that we kind of don't get in Juno.
right, yeah.
And I think that it is, it's just great. It's one of the best solo games I think I've played, and I think the fact that there's such a dedicated community that has put out additional scenarios past what the developer originally made shows how much love there is for this game.
Yeah, it really capitalizes on desperation and opportunity cost, right? You know, like, it's one of those games where you feel like there's no good circumstance other than maybe a hair's breadth of a win at the end. And it feels like every action that you're taking in the limited confines of the game is maybe not a total risk, but you know that it is prohibiting you from also acting upon something else.
Yeah, and I think that it has a ton of great opening scenarios to teach a game, so it's very easy to get into, but then it has so much after those first few that I think really shows how good of a game it is.
Which brings us to our number 1, which we built these lists independently. And nonetheless, it appears that our number 1 was unanimous. So you want to tell the good people what our number 1 is?
Our number 1, and I knew it was going to be this as soon as we talked about this video, is Spirt Island. I mean, how could it be anything else?
It's so good.
Island is just, I think, in my mind, by a sizable margin, the best solo game there is. It has so much to explore for a player like me, but it's also very analytical.
That's kind of one of the things that I think solo allows us to do in a way that multiplayer games don't always, because, you know, when you're playing a multiplayer game, often you are either trying to do the best that you can to overcome an opponent, or you're trying to do the best you can so you don't disappoint your cooperative partner. Whereas in a solo game, yes, you are trying to win, but there's less meta considerations that would prohibit you from just going, I wonder what would happen if I did this. I personally like playing single board with one single spirit, and I do love the game as a study on relationships between wildly asymmetric powers. Mm-hmm. But just having one single board and going like, what can this spirit wring out of their powers on their own without thinking about someone else being able to make up for it? And sometimes that's wildly successful, and sometimes it's disastrous. But nonetheless, it is always really interesting. You feel satisfied in both that exploratory half of solo gaming and also the challenge side of gaming in general.
Yeah, and I love playing Spirt Island as two spirits, two boards, and seeing how they interact. And I think that that's equally as valid. Totally. I think that I maybe don't get as deep into one spirit, but I think that learning the different powers and how they balance off each other is part of what makes me have this so high on my list. Is what does Hungry Ocean and Butterfly that changes dimensions look like together? How do they work? Is that good? Does that work well? I love that. That is for me what I find most impressive about Spirt Island, is how interesting those interactions are.
Yeah, totally. And while I commented with Leviathan Wilds that I love games where it kind of overcomes the need to two-hand something, and in Spirt Island you don't really have the ability to do that, but there is something about Spirt Island where because even in a multiplayer game, players play their cards, but then there's no turn order. You just go like, well, what do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? And you can interact in any way that you want. Having two spirits does separate your ability to utilize their board space, but it still feels like you're operating one hand. Like you have a bisected set of tools, but you're still thinking about them in concert with one another, which is, again, such an amazing achievement in that game in general.
How could it be anything else?
All of these games that we've listed here, with only two overlap, but definitely there's a lot of games that could have gone onto any of these lists, but Spirt Island was immediately a lock for both of us.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for watching, and as we mentioned in the Iliad and Icor video, Eric's going to be on the channel more. Let us know what you think of these games, and also what you want to see as far as some of these lists, some additional content out there, and maybe Eric, being probably the more dedicated solo gamer out of the two of us, can do some more focused solo content and reviews. Put it in the comments, and
thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining me, Eric.
Of course.